Vikings are remembered as chaos, raiders, plunderers, the opposite of a well-run operation. But strip away the helmets and the mythology, and what you actually find is one of the most disciplined logistics operations of the early medieval world. Seasonal scheduling, provisioning calculations, crew coordination, and a transport vehicle engineered for speed and access most navies wouldn't match for centuries. That sounds less like a raiding party and more like a supply chain. Which raises an uncomfortable question. What if Amazon's warehouse algorithm and a Viking war chief's raiding calendar are, underneath it all, solving the same math problem? You've probably never thought about a Viking raid as a supply chain problem, but that's exactly what it was. Before a single ship touched water, a chieftain had to answer a brutal question. How do you move armed men across open sea, into hostile territory, and back home again, alive, using a network of farmers, fishermen, and part-time warriors you don't fully control? This wasn't a side issue. It was existential. A miscalculated raid, the wrong season, an undersupplied crew, a ship too slow to escape, didn't just mean a failed mission. Food supplies were critical, and warriors had to carry dried fish, preserved meats, and water or ale to survive a voyage of unknown length. Get that math wrong, far from home, and there was no resupply truck coming. The margin for error was your life. 1,000 years later, Amazon faces a version of the same problem, just with the stakes rewritten. Last-mile delivery is the final phase of shipping, and it carries the highest per-package cost in the entire chain. It's now a roughly $201 billion global market. Nobody dies if a package is late. But in a business built on speed, losing that race can still be existential, just in a different currency. Strip away the centuries, and the structural bind looks identical. It's never about moving one thing once. It's about moving many things, repeatedly, through terrain and timing you don't fully control, using a transport system that has to balance speed, capacity, and risk all at the same time. The Vikings gambled against weather, coastlines, and surprise. Amazon gambles against traffic, demand spikes, and geography. Different obstacles. Same equation. Distance, plus uncertainty, plus limited time. How did a society with no centralized government, no military academies, and no written logistics manuals coordinate raids across hundreds of miles of open water, reliably enough to build an empire of plunder that terrified the most powerful kingdoms in Europe? The answer starts with the ship, not as a weapon, but as a piece of engineering built to solve one specific problem: access. The Viking longship was one of the most advanced vessels of its era, lightweight, flexible, and fast, capable of crossing open ocean and then navigating shallow rivers, letting raiders strike deep inland unexpectedly. Most warships of the period were built for one environment. The longship was built for all of them. The detail that made this possible was the hull. Its shallow draft meant it could land almost anywhere, which made defending against it incredibly difficult for coastal communities. Every other navy of the era was stopped by the coastline itself. They needed deep harbors and built docks. The longship needed none of that. It could run straight onto an open beach, fully loaded, and peel back off it just as fast. That's the Viking Age's last-mile problem, solved in the shape of a hull. But a fast boat doesn't raid itself. A successful raid required extensive preparation before departure. Leaders had to secure ships, gather crews, stock provisions, and determine seasonal timing. None of this was casual. Raiding seasons generally occurred during the warmer months, when seas were safer and agricultural work allowed free men to leave their farms temporarily. That's a scheduling constraint as real as any shift pattern. Except instead of a manager building the calendar, it ran on shared social knowledge. Everyone understood when the ice cleared, when planting ended, and when a farmer could become a raider without his fields failing. Provisioning followed the same logic. A crew heading into a voyage of unknown length needed food that wouldn't spoil: dried fish, preserved meats, grain products, and ale, packed against how long the trip might realistically run. Underpack, and the raid ends in starvation before it ends in plunder. Overpack, and there's no room left for the loot you came for. A real optimization problem, solved by experience and the memory of every voyage before it. So here's the reveal. What looks like chaos, axes, dragon prows, fire on the horizon, was running on a precise, repeatable system. A vehicle engineered for an access problem. A seasonal calendar enforced by weather and agriculture. A provisioning formula refined through trial and error. Decentralized, yes. Undisciplined, no. The Vikings solved their access problem with wood, wind, and timing. 1,000 years later, a different organization would hit the exact same bottleneck, not a coastline, but a driveway, and solve it with code. If the obstacle Vikings had to defeat was the coastline, what's the modern equivalent? The barrier standing between a warehouse and your front door? And why does crossing that final stretch cost more than everything else in the supply chain combined? That barrier is the last mile. It's the most expensive, most fragile part of the entire delivery process because it carries the highest per package cost in the supply chain, even though it covers the shortest distance. The reason is simple. A truck moving 1,000 identical pallets to one warehouse is efficient. A van delivering one package to one specific address, then driving to a completely different address for the next one, is not. Each delivery has to reach a distinct location. A rural property down a long dirt road, or a crowded city block where double-parked traffic eats up minutes per stop. That's Amazon's version of the beach landing, the point where a huge, efficient system has to shrink down to a single doorstep. To solve it, Amazon built a network with distinct stages, each one narrowing the gap between inventory and customer. Fulfillment centers store, pick, and pack the inventory. Sortation centers consolidate and sort packages by destination for faster onward delivery. From there, packages move to delivery stations, the final handoff point, where parcels are loaded onto vans for delivery within a roughly 45-mile service radius. Layered over all of it is software constantly recalculating routes against live traffic and weather conditions, deciding in real time which facility should fulfill which order. The clearest proof that this system actually works came in 2023 when Amazon redesigned its entire network around proximity instead of national flexibility. Following the regionalization rollout, the percentage of customer orders fulfilled entirely from facilities within their own region jumped from 62% to 76% in just the first half of the year. The distance between fulfillment sites and customers dropped by 15%, and the network needed 12% fewer touchpoints to get a package from warehouse to doorstep. Delivery speeds improved as a direct result, because more goods were simply traveling shorter distances. That regionalization shift is the modern equivalent of a Viking war chief reading the seasons. It's not a new vehicle, and it's not a new road. It's a deliberate redesign of where things are positioned before the journey even starts, so that when the order comes in, the distance left to cover is already as short as it can be. Which leads to the real reveal. Amazon's magic 2-day delivery isn't really about trucks, drones, or warehouses full of robots. It's about minimizing the distance between uncertainty, not knowing exactly what a customer will order or when, and the moment that order has to arrive at their door. That is the exact same instinct that put a dragon-headed boat directly onto an open beach instead of forcing it to wait for a proper harbor. Different centuries, different tools, but strip away the wood and the warehouses, and you start seeing the same equation underneath both systems. What's the actual math underneath both systems? Not the ships, not the software, just the decision logic. Strip both down, and you get the same 3 variables every time. First, speed of access. The shallow draft that let a long ship run straight onto a beach is the same instinct behind regional fulfillment centers built to put inventory closer to the customer before the order even arrives. Second, provisioning under uncertainty. A Viking crew calculating dried fish and ale against a voyage of unknown length is the same problem Amazon solves when it decides which warehouse should stock which item, based on a guess about who's going to want it and when. Third, decentralized execution inside a coordinated plan. Individual ship crews acting on their own judgment once they hit the water. Individual flex drivers and delivery partners making their own calls once they hit the road. In both cases, the people closest to the actual delivery moment have no real backup and full discretion. Here's the trade neither system could avoid. Both gave up tight control over individual units in exchange for speed and reach at scale. You cannot centrally micromanage every ship or every van. You can only set the conditions and let the edges execute. This isn't a loose analogy. It's the same optimization problem, run 1,000 years apart. And once you see the shared math, The parallels start showing up everywhere. Strip away the names and the centuries, and could you actually tell these two systems apart? Both rely on shallow penetration over centralized strength. Beaches instead of harbors, regional fulfillment centers instead of one national mega-warehouse. Both treat the final leg as the highest risk, highest payoff moment in the entire operation. The landing, the last mile, the part where the plan either pays off or falls apart in front of you. And both run on decentralized actors operating inside a shared structure. A raiding crew with autonomy once they're at sea, a delivery driver with autonomy once they're on the route, neither one micromanaged from above in the moment that matters most. That's a wait, that's the same thing kind of realization. But the resemblance only holds up to a point, because here's where they split. If the underlying problem is identical, why does failure get handled so differently? Viking logistics had no real-time correction. Once a ship left the shore, a bad guess about weather, food, or timing stayed a bad guess until landfall, for better or worse. Amazon's system recalculates constantly, adjusting routes against live traffic and weather data as conditions change, with AI directing inventory placement before a customer even clicks buy. The deeper difference is this. One was social, experiential planning, built on memory, custom, and seasonal pattern. The other is computational, data-driven planning, built on live feedback loops. And be honest about what each was actually optimizing for. Viking Logistics optimized for survival. Amazon's optimizes for customer experience. The eras didn't just swap tools. They swapped how much uncertainty they could tolerate before correcting course. That gap points to something bigger than either system on its own. Why do unrelated operations, 1,000 years apart, keep landing on the same structural answer? Because large-scale movement under uncertainty always pushes toward the same shape. Decentralized execution under centralized coordination. Decision-making goes outward, out to the ship's crew, out to the driver behind the wheel. But the plan, the timing, and the risk logic stay centralized, set by whoever, or whatever, is running the calculation upstream. Whether that calculation is happening in a chieftain's seasonal calendar or a machine learning routing engine, the systems converge on the same design. This isn't a coincidence between two clever organizations separated by 1,000 years. It's a pattern complex systems keep rediscovering, independently, every time the same problem shows up. Which leaves one real question. What does this teach us about solving any hard coordination problem? Discipline and decentralization aren't opposites. They're a package deal. The best systems decentralize at the edges only because they've already centralized what actually matters: timing, supply, and risk tolerance. Everything that has to be fast and adaptive gets pushed outward, to the people closest to the action. Everything that has to be exact and reliable gets held tightly at the core. Chaos at the edges. Order at the core. That's a mental model that travels well beyond shipping routes and Viking ships. It shows up anywhere people have to move fast, at scale, through conditions nobody fully controls. So the next time you see a delivery truck idling outside your building, remember it's running on the same logic as a 1,000-year-old Viking raid. What other system do you think is secretly solving this same problem? Drop it below.